Welcome back, America. You heard John Podhoretz update us earlier this hour on the Hugh Hewitt Show about the shaky coalition that Benjamin Netanyahu now confronts in the aftermath of the hostage deal. I'm joined by Josh Kraushaar, editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. What's the latest, Josh? Is the Netanyahu government going to fall?
There's a real possibility that that happens, and that's been something that Netanyahu has had to be aware of throughout his most recent government, that he's had to appeal to the most right-wing elements in Israeli public opinion, because otherwise there would be new elections and his government could certainly fall and there could be a new prime minister. So that's been sort of the factor throughout all these negotiations dating back over the past year. Look, the big concern, and I'm sure John went over that in his conversation, is after this first phase, which is about a 42-day process, the two, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, want Israel to have the ability to go back to war and go after Hamas. Hamas is still, if all these phases of the deal go into place, Hamas will remain in power in Gaza, which is something that Israel said was not an option. And even the U.S. government, Biden at the beginning of the war, said that was not an option. But it looks like if this deal fully goes through, that's going to be the case. So Ben-Gvir and Smotrich want to guarantee that Israel can go and attack Hamas and go back to war after that first phase. That would blow up the deal potentially, if certainly if Netanyahu said that publicly, and it's what's created this very this very uncertain time with the Israeli government in these negotiations.
Now, John told me that Ben-Gvir is gone. He's quit the coalition, but Smotrich has not yet been heard from, another right-winger. My question is, don't they have enough support in the Knesset to stay together for a year to finish the war and finish the hostage deal? I mean, Netanyahu he's probably in the strongest political position he's been since 10/7. Am I right about that?
Well, as I understand it, one of the two, they both represent two different right-wing parties that are similar in terms of ideology. If one of the two leaves, there's enough of a mandate, enough wiggle room that it wouldn't make a difference in the short term. If both end up actually stepping aside, that could prompt new elections. Now, you could say that Bibi should welcome new elections. Maybe it would be helpful to have a more centrist government instead of being sort of held hostage, if you will, to some of the more right-wing elements of this coalition. But look, I think if you look at some of the polling, it's far from certain Netanyahu could win re-election. And there's a lot of discussion over how the lack of preparation in Israel before October 7th. So there's a lot of domestic politicking going on. I also think there's a lot of interesting politics in the U.S. and how that's affected the contours of this deal and the negotiations. And I think Donald Trump certainly played a pivotal role in getting all the parties over the finish line and helping persuade Netanyahu to make some of these concessions to end up finalizing this very
now,
deal.
Josh,
Seems very, very...
I want to get your assessment of the deal. Just Josh Kraushaar, not the Jewish Journal's official position, not the official what the Israeli public thinks in majority terms. What do you think of it?
It's a tough deal to swallow, especially given that the Israeli government has been saying that the goal is to defeat Hamas. They took out Sinwar. They've had a lot of military successes, not just against Hamas in Gaza, but against Hezbollah, against Iran in the larger region, but it hasn't translated in building leverage and in convincing Hamas to give up any hostages without these very painful concessions. And there are a lot of painful concessions as part of this deal. This is very similar to what President Biden had proposed back in May initially, where you're going to see hundreds of, if not over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, many with blood on their hands, being released potentially into Gaza. As part of this deal, you're going to see some of the most hardened extremists in the Gaza celebrating the return of some of these terrorists, and you also have Israel pulling out. There's a lot of complicated details about where and when these withdrawals are going to take place, but it means that Israel's going to have less ability to counter terrorism and counter Hamas especially if this goes past the phase one part of the deal. So there are a lot of painful concessions that Israel is making. On the other hand, look, if you talk to most Israelis across the political spectrum, Hugh, they've been waiting for the hostages to come home. There are 98 being held. Not all of them are alive. Many of them are in very, very bad health, and it's kind of hard to imagine the images and the video we're going to see in the coming weeks if this deal does go through. And I think there is I think we always knew from the get-go, Hugh, that it was almost impossible both to get the hostages home and have a complete victory against Hamas. That there were going to have to be concessions and compromises made, and that's what's going on right now.
So, Josh, last question. In terms, and I want to completely pivot here to Los Angeles, where the Jewish community is large and longstanding presence in Los Angeles. What do they think of the absolute incompetence of this city and state government?
Well, I think watching some of the reaction from everyone across the political spectrum who lives and has been affected by these devastating fires, it's we're seeing what happens when you don't have the most competent government officials in charge. It's a luxury to have some of the ideological arguments that have been made, and Gavin Newsom has sort of positioned California in that space. And then you realize the cost when you don't have people who are competent, who are good at government. Look, I mean, the mayor's race a few years ago between Karen Bass and Rick Caruso. Rick Caruso was almost won that race as a moderate, as a guy who had business experience, who actually campaigned on some of the problems with firefighting and water supply in the state and in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles. And
I hope he runs for governor now. I don't want him to run for mayor. I hope he runs for governor. Josh, I got to roll on. I appreciate you very much. Josh Kraushaar on X. Please go and look him up.